My name is Lucinda Grant. I am 68 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I was the quiet foundation of a family that never noticed how much weight I carried for them. I built a life with my late husband Benjamin, and when he died I was left with his fortune, more than $5 billion. Money that was supposed to protect me in my old age, not turn me into prey. I remember the moment my son-in-law Dylan leaned close to me in the cabin, his breath heavy with smoke and whiskey. "Hope you like fire," he whispered as he locked the wooden door. The bolt snapped shut like a gunshot, final and merciless. The flames were already crawling along the floorboards, hungry and fast. I screamed, my voice tearing at my throat. I pounded against the door, my fists splintering against the wood, but Dylan only laughed. My daughter, Eliza, stood beside him. My only child, the girl I once cradled in my arms when she was feverish, the girl I stayed awake for during endless nights of exams and heartbreaks. She stood there, her face lit by the orange glow of fire. She did not cry. She did not run to me. She only smiled, cold, distant, as if the woman burning inside that cabin was no longer her mother, but an obstacle. They thought the fortune was already theirs. They thought I would be nothing more than ashes and a headline about an elderly widow who had grown careless with gas. They believed their lies would be enough to convince the world that I had simply wandered into an accident. But when they returned home later, ready to celebrate their victory, I was already waiting. Not in the fire, not in the grave they had chosen for me. I was sitting in Benjamin's old leather armchair, the one he gave me on our 20th anniversary, and in my hands I carried something they never expected. Proof. The kind of proof that does not burn. The kind of proof that turns predators into prisoners. Yes, they locked me in a burning cabin, but I did not burn. I did not die. I was not finished. They still do not understand who I am. I am Lucinda Grant. And this is the story of how my own blood tried to erase me, how I rose from the fire they thought would destroy me, and how I learned that silence, patience, and truth are stronger than greed. I did not burn. I am not finished. And they still do not know I am alive. If you are listening to my story now, I want you to stay with me. Stories like this are not just mine. They belong to anyone who has been betrayed by the very people they trusted most. They belong to those who have been called too old, too weak, or too inconvenient to matter. If you have ever felt that way, then this story is also yours. Before I continue, I will ask you something simple. Tell me where you are listening from. Maybe it is a quiet morning with coffee warming your hands. Maybe it is late at night when stories like this keep you awake. Let me know. And if you feel the weight of my story, if it touches something inside you, share it. Because stories only live when we pass them on. Now let me take you back to that Tuesday morning. On the surface, it was an ordinary day. The leaves outside my window were just beginning to turn gold with the first whisper of autumn. The air carried that crisp sharpness that always reminded me of new beginnings. I never imagined it would be the day my daughter and her husband decided to kill me. It began with a phone call. Eliza's voice sounded warm, almost too warm, when she said, "Mom, Dylan and I want to do something special for your birthday. Come up to the old cabin in Montana. We fixed it up just for you." That was the hook in their trap, disguised as love. I should have recognized it. I should have heard the rehearsed smile in her words. But when you are 68 and widowed, you cling to even the faintest sign that your child still wants you. So I agreed. I told myself it would be good, a family gathering, a celebration of my life. Instead, it became a rehearsal of my death. When Dylan turned the lock and left me in that inferno, I felt more than just fear. I felt the betrayal of generations pressing down on me. Betrayal is heavier than fire. It suffocates you in a different way. The flames were consuming the curtains, the rafters crackling like brittle bones, smoke clawing at my lungs. Yet, even in that chaos, I remembered something Benjamin once told me. "Lucinda," he said, "always know your way out. Even from the darkest place there is a hidden door." And he was right. The cabin was not just wood and fire, it carried secrets. A trapdoor Benjamin had shown me long ago, hidden behind the old bookcase in the study. My hands were bleeding, my body shaking, but I dragged myself across the floor. I found the seam of the wood, pressed, and it gave way. That hidden door saved me. The fire took the house, but it could not take me. When I walked out of the trees hours later, bruised, covered in ash, and alive, I understood something with terrifying clarity. My daughter had chosen money over blood. Dylan had chosen murder over patience. They thought they had ended my life. In reality, they had awakened me. Because fire does not only destroy, fire reveals. And I was ready to reveal everything. I did not burn. I was not finished. And they still do not know I am alive. When the flames of that night fade in my memory, what comes back to me most clearly is not the fire itself, but what led me there. To understand how I ended up locked inside a burning cabin by the people who should have loved me most, you have to understand who I am, who they are, and how money can rot the roots of a family until all that is left is ash. I was 68 years old when it happened, a widow for 6 long years. My husband, Benjamin Grant, had built a fortune in technology before most of the world even understood what that word really meant. He was not flashy. He was not reckless. He built things with patience and foresight. He used to say, "True wealth is not in numbers, Lucinda. It is in what you leave standing when you are gone." He left behind more than $5 billion, but to me, the true wealth he left was our memories together. Memories that should have been a comfort, but turned instead into weapons in the hands of our daughter. After his death, Eliza and I grew apart. The grief did not bind us together. It drove a wedge so deep, I sometimes wondered if we had ever truly known one another. At Benjamin's funeral, while I was barely standing, I caught her smiling stiffly at a group of his business partners, already asking questions about next steps and future holdings. That was the first time I saw the chill in her eyes. A part of me wanted to excuse it. She was hurting. She was lost. But the months that followed showed me something darker. She visited less and less. Her words, when she spoke to me, were clipped, rehearsed. She would say, "Mom, you really should not live alone." But what she meant was, "Mom, you should not live in a house I cannot control." I tried to ignore it. I tried to believe the best. Mothers are good at that. We forgive even when we should not. Then, one September morning, the phone rang. Her voice came through the line, syrupy, sweet, in a way that immediately unsettled me. "Mom," she said, "Dylan and I want to do something special for your birthday this year. We thought maybe you would like to see the old cabin. We fixed it up. Just the 3 of us, like old times." The old cabin. Just the mention of it pulled at something deep inside me. It was not just a building. It was where Benjamin and I had spent anniversaries, where we had taught Eliza how to fish, where laughter once echoed off the wood-paneled walls. For a moment, my heart softened. The thought of returning there, with my daughter, felt almost like a second chance. Still, there was something in her tone I could not quite trust. She sounded rehearsed, like she had practiced the invitation in front of a mirror. And yet, I said yes. Because when your child finally calls you, finally offers you a hand after years of distance, you take it. You do not ask why. You do not ask what it will cost. You just take it. I told myself it was the kind of surprise Benjamin would have wanted. He always wanted peace between us. He hated seeing the tension after he passed. I could almost hear his voice saying, "Give her the chance, Lucinda." People can change. But in the silence after the call, I stared at the framed wedding photo of Benjamin and me on the mantel. The glass caught the light of a candle burning nearby. His smile, captured in that frozen moment, seemed to say something different. It seemed to say, "Be careful." That night I walked through the house alone. I touched the things we had built together, the photographs, the books, the small silver box where he used to keep notes to me. Every detail whispered the truth. The cabin was ours. It had been a sanctuary, a place of intimacy and love. To think of it in Eliza's hands, refurbished under her direction, made me shiver. What had she changed? What had she taken away? When I arrived in Montana weeks later, the drive up to the cabin confirmed my unease. The road that Benjamin and I had traveled in our old truck was now paved smooth, lined with new fencing. Even the trees looked trimmed, as if someone had tried to tame the wilderness that used to feel so alive. Dylan's shiny Range Rover pulled into the driveway ahead of me. He stepped out with a grin too wide, too polished. "Mom," he said, embracing me quickly. His cologne was strong, expensive, not at all the scent of wood smoke and earth I associated with this place. Behind him, Eliza stood with her arms folded. "Welcome home," she said. The words should have warmed me. Instead, they felt like ice. Inside, the cabin smelled of new varnish and scented candles. The walls gleamed with fresh paint. The furniture was sleek, modern, utterly foreign. The quilt Benjamin's mother had stitched, once draped across the old couch, was gone. The photographs of Eliza as a child, once lining the hallway, were nowhere to be seen. In their place hung abstract art, cold and meaningless. It was no longer a cabin of memories. It was a stage. "Do you like it?" Eliza asked, her voice tight. "We wanted it to feel fresh." Fresh. That was her word for erasing everything that had made it ours. I smiled weakly because what else could I do? I told myself it was only discomfort, that I was imagining the distance in her tone, that maybe, just maybe, she really did want to celebrate me. But as the evening shadows lengthened and the candles flickered, I heard the faint echo of my own thoughts. The cabin was not a gift, it was bait. And I had already walked inside the trap. Dylan opened the passenger door of his Range Rover as if he were a chauffeur greeting royalty. "Here we are, Mom," he said with a grin so polished it felt borrowed from a business meeting rather than a family gathering. The leather seat smelled of money, not of the mountain air I remembered from Benjamin's old truck. Even the way he held the keys, twirling them between his fingers, spoke of performance. The cabin appeared at the end of the gravel path, but it no longer resembled the place Benjamin and I once called a sanctuary. The logs had been freshly stained, too dark, too perfect. The stone chimney rose like a monument rather than a hearth. I stepped out of the car and inhaled, expecting pine and smoke. Instead, I caught the faint sweetness of chemical varnish. My heart sank. Inside, the changes cut deeper. The living room where Benjamin had read to Eliza by the fire was stripped of warmth. The rocking chair he built with his own hands was gone. In its place stood a sleek white leather sofa that looked better suited to a city penthouse than a cabin in the woods. The lopsided bookshelf that once held our photo albums had been replaced by floating glass shelves lined with modern sculptures I could not name. Eliza followed me in, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood. "Do you like it?" she asked, her eyes bright but cold. "We wanted to give it new life, something worthy of you." I nodded, forcing a smile. "It is different." Different was the only word I could manage. What I wanted to say was that it no longer felt like mine, or Benjamin's, or even hers. It felt staged, scrubbed of history, dressed for a performance that had nothing to do with family. Dylan moved toward the fireplace, striking a match. The flame caught instantly, too fast, too high, as though the wood had been treated. Within moments, the fire roared, filling the room with unnatural heat. I stepped back, unsettled. "Nothing like a fire to make it feel cozy," Dylan said, pouring himself a drink from the bar cart. His eyes flicked to me. "You must be tired after the drive. Sit, relax. Eliza placed a glass of wine in my hand before I could protest. It is your birthday weekend, Mom. We want to take care of everything. I raised the glass, but the scent was sharp, almost metallic. My stomach tightened. I set it down on the table beside me, unnoticed. We sat in a strained silence until Dylan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You know, Mom, probate can be so complicated. All those documents, so much red tape. Eliza's hand brushed his arm, her signal for him to continue. I was thinking, he said, voice casual but eyes sharp. Maybe it would be easier for you if things were simplified, if Eliza and I helped manage the assets, just so you do not have to worry. The words slid across the room like oil on water. I stared at the fire, its flames leaping higher than they should, sparks snapping against the grate. My pulse quickened. I appreciate your concern, I said slowly, but I am perfectly capable of managing my affairs. Eliza tilted her head, her smile too sweet. Of course, Mom. We just want to make sure everything is handled, in case something unexpected happens. Her words carried a chill that the fire could not warm. I glanced around the room, searching for the comfort I once knew here. The lamp in the corner flickered, light stuttering before steadying again. The smell of gas brushed against my nose, faint but undeniable. My eyes moved to the kitchen, where the pilot light on the stove glowed brighter than it should, a tiny flame that seemed to hiss. Something was wrong. The unease grew heavier with each minute. I thought of Benjamin's voice, warning me to always trust my instincts, and my instincts screamed now. Let's take a walk outside, I suggested, rising. The evening air is crisp. It will do us good. But Dylan blocked me with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Stay a while longer, Mom. We planned this evening carefully. There is so much to talk about. I sat again, my hands folded, tightly in my lap, the wine glass still untouched beside me. The walls felt closer. The fire cracked too loud, too hot. The gas hissed from somewhere unseen. The cabin, once a place of laughter and safety, had been transformed. It no longer sheltered me. It surrounded me. A memory flashed. Eliza as a little girl running barefoot across this same floor, giggling as Benjamin chased her with a blanket cape. That child was gone. In her place stood a woman whose smile reminded me of the sharp edge of broken glass. The realization settled in my bones. I was not a guest here. I was cornered prey. Every detail confirmed it. The locked windows, the oversized fire, the unnatural stillness in their questions. The cabin had been remade not for comfort, but for control. For the first time since Benjamin died, I felt truly alone. Not because I had no family left, but because the family I had was planning something I could not yet name, but already feared. The warmth of the fire pressed against my skin, suffocating rather than soothing. I forced myself to keep breathing, to keep calm, to watch every movement, every glance. I had walked into what they called a homecoming, but it was not a home. It was a trap. Dylan poured the wine slowly, watching the dark liquid swirl into the glass. You should have a drink, Mom, he said, handing it to me with the same charm he used on strangers at dinner parties. For your birthday. I hesitated, but Eliza stood nearby, her eyes fixed on me, her smile unreadable. I lifted the glass to my lips, tasting the sharp edge of bitterness. It burned in a way that did not belong to wine. Within minutes, my limbs felt heavier, my thoughts slower, as though I were being lulled into someone else's dream. My fingers tightened around the arm of the chair. Something was wrong. My body knew it before my mind could name it. What did you give me? I whispered, my voice hoarse. Dylan's grin widened, though he pretended to look offended. Just wine, Mom. You must be tired from the trip. Tired. That was not the word. Drugged was the word. Betrayed was the word. I pushed myself to my feet, swaying. The room spun. I need air, I said, stumbling toward the door, but the handle would not turn. I rattled it harder, panic tightening around my chest. It was locked. The sound echoed too loudly in the room, as if even the walls wanted me trapped. Dylan stepped closer, his shadow cutting into the flickering firelight. "Sit down, Mom. Rest. The fire will keep you warm." His voice was smooth, rehearsed, like a lullaby masking a threat. Behind him, Eliza stood with her arms crossed. She did not speak. She did not cry. She only nodded once, a small signal as Dylan slid the bolt firmly into place. The fire in the hearth cracked louder. Sparks jumped higher, scattering onto the rug. My eyes darted to the windows, but they too were sealed. The heat pressed closer, heavy and suffocating. "Please," I whispered, reaching for Eliza. "I am your mother." Her face did not change. If there was any hesitation, any flicker of the girl I once raised, it did not show. Only silence. Only that cold nod as if to say, "Yes, it is done." The scent of burning pine filled my lungs, mixed with something sharper. Gas. It leaked invisibly, feeding the fire as it clawed along the walls. Smoke curled up from the floorboards, winding around my ankles like dark fingers. I stumbled backward, coughing, my vision blurred by tears. My skin prickled from the growing heat. The crackling grew louder, a roar building inside the cabin as though the house itself had turned against me. The flames climbed higher, licking the curtains, racing toward the ceiling beams. The room was no longer a home, it was a furnace. For one terrifying moment, I thought it was over. I thought this would be my grave, trapped behind a locked door, betrayed by my own blood. My heart pounded with the weight of finality. And then, through the haze of smoke, memory struck me like a lifeline. Benjamin's voice, soft, steady, guiding. "Lucinda," he once said, standing with me in this very cabin decades ago, "always know your way out." I built this place with more than love. I built it with foresight. There is a door, hidden in case we ever need to disappear, a room no one else knows about. Remember. The memory cut through the drug in my veins, sharper than the fire itself. I staggered toward the study, coughing, my hands shielding my face from the heat. Every step was a battle, every breath like swallowing knives, but I clung to Benjamin's words, a hidden door, a secret way out. Smoke curled down from the rafters, turning the air thick, almost solid. My body screamed for me to lie down, to give in, to let the fire take me. But I forced myself forward, groping along the wall, my fingertips searching for the seam in the wood paneling. There, beneath the shelves, where Benjamin once stored his ledgers, a faint outline, almost invisible in the shadows. I pressed, and the wood gave way. The trapdoor creaked open, a whisper of salvation beneath the roar of flames. Cool air rushed up from below, carrying the damp smell of earth. I fell to my knees, pulling myself through, my body scraping against the rough edges. Above me, the fire consumed the cabin. The smoke howled, pressing against the ceiling like a storm. But below, there was a path, a tunnel Benjamin had carved, leading away from the cabin into the safety of the woods. My hands shook, my lungs burned, but I knew then that I was not finished. Not yet. Dylan's words still rang in my ears. The fire will keep you warm. But the fire would not keep me. The fire would reveal me. And as I pulled the trapdoor closed above me, leaving the inferno behind, one thought crystallized in my mind. They believed I would die here tonight. They believed the flames would erase me. They were wrong. I remembered Benjamin's final gift, the foresight of a hidden door, and, with it, the chance to rise from the ashes. The fire may have been their weapon, but survival would be my answer. The hidden tunnel smelled of damp earth and memory. My hands scraped against stone as I crawled forward, each movement tearing the skin on my palms. Warm blood streaked across the dirt, mixing with the soot that already clung to my arms. My lungs burned, every cough rattling like broken glass inside me. Still, I pushed onward. Behind me, the fire roared above the trapdoor, devouring the cabin that had once been my refuge. The tunnel was narrow, built for necessity, not comfort. Benjamin had dug it decades ago, insisting on what he called a survival whim. At the time, I laughed, teasing him about being dramatic. "What are we running from, Benjamin?" I had asked. He only smiled. "Not everything in life is predictable, Lucinda. One day you'll be glad I thought ahead." Tonight those words carried me forward. I do not know how long I crawled. Minutes, maybe hours. Darkness bent time into something shapeless. My breath came ragged, shallow, each gasp dragging smoke deeper into my chest. My knees were raw from the rocky ground, my nails broken. I felt the sting of blisters opening, the slow trickle of blood. Yet the thought of Eliza standing behind that locked door, nodding her silent approval, burned worse than any wound. When the tunnel finally opened, the night air hit me like a mercy I did not deserve. Cold, sharp, filled with pine and freedom. I collapsed onto the forest floor, gulping oxygen as though it were water. My body shook with violent coughs until I spat blood into the dirt. Above me, the sky stretched endless and indifferent. Smoke rose behind the trees, curling into the stars. The cabin was gone. My daughter had meant for me to vanish with it. I tried to stand, but my legs betrayed me. I staggered forward, half crawling, half dragging myself through the underbrush. Branches tore at my hair, smearing ash into my scalp. My dress clung to me, stiff with sweat and soot. Every step screamed agony, yet I could not stop. I repeated Benjamin's name like a prayer, each syllable pulling me farther from the fire. At last, through the blur of exhaustion, a light flickered in the distance. A porch lamp. I knew that light, though it had been years. Ruth, my old friend, my confidant. The woman who had once stood beside me in courtrooms, sharp as steel, before she retired to this quiet corner of Montana. I stumbled toward her house, collapsing twice before I reached the steps. My fists, bloodied and trembling, beat against her door. It opened with a creak, and there she was, older, grayer, but unmistakably Ruth. Her eyes widened as she took in my state. "Lucinda," she gasped, catching me before I fell. "Good Lord, what happened to you?" Her hands pressed against my shoulders, steadying me. I could not find words at first. Only sobs and coughs broke from me. She pulled me inside, guiding me toward the couch, her voice firm but gentle. "Sit down. You're hurt. Stay still." The room smelled of chamomile tea and old books, a scent that wrapped around me like safety itself. Ruth fetched a blanket, draping it over my trembling body. Her fingers brushed the burns on my arm, the blood streaked across my hands. Her face paled. "Who did this to you?" she demanded. I met her gaze, and the words fell out raw, stripped of everything but truth. "My daughter," I whispered. "Eliza, she wants me dead." The silence that followed was heavier than fire. Ruth's lips parted, her eyes searching mine for any trace of delirium. But she saw the burns. She smelled the smoke clinging to me, and she knew. Her hands tightened around mine. "Tell me everything." So I did. Between ragged breaths, I told her about the cabin, the locked door, Dylan's voice whispering that the fire would keep me warm. I told her about the nod, Eliza's cold, wordless consent. I told her about the wine, the metallic taste, the trap door Benjamin had built. Ruth listened, her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing with each detail. When I finished, she sat back, silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice low and certain. "They tried to erase you, Lucinda, but you're still here. And if you're here, then we'll make them pay." I clutched the small wooden box she placed in my hands, one she had pulled from a drawer. Inside were bandages, ointments, the tools of care. But to me, it felt like more than first aid. It felt like a lifeline. As she wrapped my wounds, the weight of betrayal pressed harder. I thought of Eliza's smile, the way she had once called me Mommy when she was scared of thunderstorms. Now she was the storm, and I was the casualty she meant to bury. Yet beneath the grief, something else stirred. A spark, not of fire, but of resolve. I had survived the flames. I had walked through the tunnel Benjamin built with love and foresight, and now I sat in Ruth's house, alive, breathing, with proof written across my burned skin. I was not done. Ruth's eyes met mine, fierce and unwavering. "We'll start with the truth," she said. "Then we'll build from there. They think they hold all the cards. Let's show them what they've forgotten. You are Lucinda Grant, and you are not finished." Her words anchored me. The fire had tried to erase me. My daughter had tried to erase me. But I was still here. Blood on my hands, ash in my hair, breath in my lungs. And for the first time since Benjamin's death, I felt awake. Ruth always carried answers in the corners of her life, the way some people carry prayer beads or lucky charms. That night, as I sat on her couch with my hands wrapped in gauze and ash, still tangled in my hair, she leaned back and studied me. Then she said, "There's someone you need to meet." The following morning, just as the gray light touched the horizon, she brought him to her home. Max Carter, a retired detective turned private investigator. He was well into his 70s, his hair white but his eyes sharper than any man half his age. He moved with a limp, the ghost of an old injury, but when he shook my hand, his grip was firm, unflinching. "Mrs. Grant," he said, nodding once, "Ruth tells me you survived something most don't walk away from. I'm sorry for that, and impressed." I offered a weary smile. Impressed isn't the word I'd use. Betrayed feels closer. Max lowered himself into a chair across from me, pulling a small notebook from his coat pocket. Its leather was worn, its pages filled with a sprawl of purple ink. "Ruth says you've got names. Let's start there." I reached for a pen, my hands trembling as I opened Ruth's old address book. The names came faster than I expected, as though they had been waiting just under the surface of my grief. "Dr. Henry Collins," I said first. "My personal physician. He signed off on every surgery, every prescription, every note that Eliza shoved in front of me when I was too weak to argue. He's the one who insisted I needed Dylan and Eliza to manage my paperwork while I was recovering." Max nodded, jotting the name in his notebook with deliberate strokes. "Second," I whispered, my throat tightening. "Patricia Lang. My estate attorney. She had access to every document Benjamin and I drew up. If Eliza had any help rewriting my will or forging my signature, Patricia would be the one to open the door." Max's pen scratched again. "And the third?" I hesitated, the name bitter in my mouth. "Marcus Reed, my investment manager. He handled the trusts, the accounts, the foundations. He knows where every dollar lives. And if Dylan promised him a share of the spoils, he would not hesitate to play along." The room went quiet. Ruth reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. 3 names, 3 places to start. But Lucinda, are you ready for what you might find? This won't just be betrayal from your daughter. This could be an entire web. I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. I need to know the truth. Without it, I'm just another woman who vanished in a fire. Max closed his notebook with a snap. "Then here's the reality. Your pain is valid, but it's not evidence. If we want to expose them, we need proof. Something the courts, the press, even the public can't ignore. Documents, recordings, money trails. That's the only way predators like these are stopped." His bluntness stung, but he was right. My burns, my story, even Ruth's testimony would not be enough. Eliza and Dylan had already begun weaving a tale of my confusion, of my so-called decline. Without hard evidence, I would remain nothing more than a ghost in their narrative. Ruth leaned forward, her voice sharp. "So how do we get proof?" Max's eyes flicked to me. "We start where they feel safest. Their home. While they're out playing the grieving family, there may be records, digital or physical, that they're keeping close. If they're working with your doctor, your lawyer, and your manager, there will be traces. Trust me. Criminals always leave a trail when they believe no one's watching. I swallowed hard, picturing the house Eliza now lived in, the same one Benjamin and I once filled with laughter. The thought of stepping back inside made my stomach twist. But Max was right. If Eliza and Dylan believed I was dead, they would not bother hiding much. When? I asked. Max's voice carried no hesitation. Tonight. The sooner the better. Every day that passes gives them more time to tighten their story. The decision hung in the air like smoke. I felt the weight of it pressing against my chest, the memory of the flames still fresh in my lungs, but something else stirred beneath the fear, a sense of clarity. Benjamin once told me, "Truth has a way of finding its way through the cracks, Lucinda, but sometimes you have to push it through yourself." This was that moment. "All right," I said finally. "We do it tonight." Max smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed grave. He pulled a small USB stick from his pocket and set it on Ruth's table. "This one's empty. When we're done, it won't be. We'll copy whatever we can from their computers. Emails, bank statements, contracts, anything that ties them to Collins, Lang, and Reed." I stared at the tiny device, its weight out of proportion to its size. Empty now, but soon it might hold my life. Proof that I had not imagined the betrayal, proof that my daughter had conspired to erase me. Ruth poured us tea, though none of us touched it. The air was too thick, charged with the gravity of what lay ahead. "They think I'm ashes," I said quietly. "They think the fire erased me. But they don't know that Benjamin left me more than memories. He left me tools. And tonight, I'll use them." Max tucked his notebook away and stood. "Then let's get to work. We've got one chance to walk into their lives unseen. And when they come home from their little search party for the mother they already buried, we'll be waiting, this time with the truth." The night air in Portland carried a damp chill, the kind that clung to your bones. Max drove us in silence, his old sedan blending into the street like it belonged to the shadows. I sat in the passenger seat, my bandaged hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding harder the closer we got to Eliza's house. That house had once been mine. Benjamin and I had raised Eliza there. The walls had heard her laughter, her tantrums, her whispered secrets at bedtime. Now it belonged to her and Dylan. Tonight it would reveal whether the daughter I once loved had truly buried me. We parked a block away. Max handed me a pair of gloves and a small flashlight. "Stay behind me," he said. "No noise unless necessary." His voice was calm, seasoned. I nodded, though every muscle in me trembled. The side door yielded easily to Max's practiced hand. We stepped inside, the smell of lavender candles mixing with something more sterile. Fresh paint, maybe, or bleach. The living room was staged like a magazine spread. On the wall above the mantel hung Eliza's wedding photograph, she and Dylan smiling like royalty, my absence noticeable only to me. My chest tightened. They had already erased me from the family gallery. Max gestured toward the basement door. Documents are usually hidden below, fewer eyes. The basement creaked under our steps. The air was cooler, heavier, thick with dust. Boxes were stacked neatly along the walls, labeled with handwriting I recognized. Eliza's, though sharper now, stripped of warmth. My flashlight beam landed on a frame, a medical certificate, Dr. Henry Collins. His signature looped in blue ink, authentic and brazen, as if to say he stood behind everything they were doing. Beside it lay a folder on a work table. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside, documents of transfer, properties, accounts, trusts. My name forged in places where my hand had never moved. My signature, copied with precision, mocked me from the page. My knees nearly buckled. "Keep steady," Max whispered. He scanned the room like a soldier, then pointed to another stack of papers. I lifted them one by one. A psychological evaluation. Patient shows increasing confusion, lapses in memory, difficulty recognizing familiar people. Signed again by Collins. Stamped by a clinic I had never visited. I whispered, "They're building a case that I've lost my mind." Max's jaw tightened. "Not building, built. This is their shield if anyone questions your disappearance." We pressed on. In the far corner of the basement, Max knelt beside a chest. He pried it open, revealing neatly bound folders, each labeled with dates. Inside were drafts of legal documents, some printed, some marked with edits in Dylan's bold handwriting. One folder was thicker than the rest, heavier. Max slid it across the table. I opened it and froze. A death certificate. My death certificate. My name, Lucinda Grant, typed cleanly across the top. Cause of death, accidental fire. Beneath it, the signature of a coroner. The date was blank, waiting to be filled. My throat closed. They had prepared my funeral before lighting the match. Max placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Breathe. Evidence is power, not doom. Remember that." I nodded, forcing air back into my lungs. My flashlight swept across the room again, catching the faint outline of a zipper in a couch pillow. I pulled it open, my fingers trembling. Inside, hidden within the stuffing, was a small black USB drive. Max's eyebrows rose. "Now that's what we're here for." We carried it upstairs to the kitchen table, plugging it into Max's portable laptop. The screen flickered, then opened a folder titled Thaw Plan. My stomach churned. Snow melting. I whispered. That's what Eliza called it once when she was a teenager, waiting for spring to wash away secrets. Inside the folder were recordings, dozens of them. Max clicked one. Eliza's voice filled the room, rehearsed and hollow. "We're devastated. My mother had been struggling with her memory for months. When she wandered to the cabin alone, we begged her not to go. We did everything we could." I gripped the edge of the table as another file played. Dylan this time. She was frail. We told her it wasn't safe, but she insisted. We're heartbroken, truly heartbroken. They had practiced their lies as though grief were a performance, their scripts polished for reporters, neighbors, police. Each recording was a dagger, carving deeper into the truth of what they had planned. Max's eyes narrowed. This is gold. Public rehearsals of a false narrative. You couldn't invent stronger proof of intent. I leaned back, the weight of it all pressing down on me. They killed me before the fire ever touched the cabin. In their minds, I was already gone. We copied every file, every document onto the USB Max had brought. He tucked it into his coat pocket with the care of a man carrying dynamite. "This is enough to start, but it's not the end. We'll need more. Financial trails, phone records. But tonight we've struck the vein." As we prepared to leave, I glanced one last time at the wedding photo in the living room. Eliza's smile was radiant, but now I saw it for what it was. A mask, polished and cold. My own absence in that frame told the story better than words ever could. Max locked the side door behind us and we slipped back into the night. The air outside was cool, fresh, alive. I pressed my burned hand against my chest, feeling the faint beat of survival there. "They thought they buried me in fire," I whispered. "But the ashes are speaking now." Max nodded, his eyes glinting under the streetlight. "And soon, the whole world will hear." Max never moved fast, but when he did, it meant the stakes had sharpened. The morning after we uncovered the files, he sat at Ruth's kitchen table with his battered notebook open, tapping a pen against its spine. "There's one person I trust with something like this," he said, "but she's not the type you call unless you're ready to hand her your life." Ruth raised her eyebrows. "Who?" Max looked at me. "Cynthia Hale. Former FBI, now in a special task force that investigates elder abuse and financial exploitation. She's built her career on finding predators who dress themselves up as family. If anyone can take what we've got and turn it into justice, it's her." The name hung in the air. I imagined another stranger knowing I was alive. Another voice added to the secret I carried. Fear prickled down my arms, but I forced myself to nod. "Call her," I said. "If Eliza and Dylan are part of something bigger, I want to—" "No." Max dialed the number with slow precision. The line crackled, and a woman's voice answered, firm, clipped. "Hale." "It's Carter," Max said simply. "I've got a live one." There was silence on the other end, then a shift in tone. "Where are you?" 2 hours later, Cynthia Hale sat across from me at Ruth's table. She was in her 50s, her dark hair streaked with gray, her suit plain but immaculate. Her eyes were steady, assessing, as though she had already measured me before we shook hands. I noticed the small recorder she set quietly by her cup of tea, its red light blinking. "Lucinda Grant," she said, her tone even, "presumed dead in a cabin fire 2 nights ago. Yet here you are, very much alive. Why don't you tell me everything, in your own words?" My hands shook as I spoke, so Ruth poured me tea. I told Cynthia about the cabin, about the locked door, about Dylan's whisper. "Hope you like fire." I told her about Eliza's nod, silent and final, and the tunnel Benjamin had built. I told her about the basement in Portland, the forged signatures, the USB with the rehearsed statements. Cynthia listened without interruption, her pen scratching notes in quick strokes. When I finished, she leaned back, studying me. "You understand, Mrs. Grant, this is not just a family dispute. If what you're saying is true, it's organized, coordinated, and it might not be the first time." Her words sent a chill through me. "What do you mean, not the first time?" Cynthia slid a folder across the table. 2 years ago, an elderly man in Vermont was found dead in his cabin. Fire consumed the building, and the report listed it as accidental. He was worth $32 million. The will was contested, but eventually shifted to his son and daughter-in-law. She opened another file. 9 months later, Idaho. Another cabin fire. Widow, 74 years old. Estate of nearly $60 million. Again, the heirs walked away with everything. Both times, the fire was ruled an accident. Both times, the narrative was dementia, confusion, carelessness with the fireplace. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Cabins," I whispered. "Always cabins." "Exactly," Cynthia said. And in both cases, when we pulled the probate documents, we found a striking detail. The same legal firm filed the paperwork. A boutique practice out of Boston, Lang & Associates. The same name you just gave me. Patricia Lang, my estate lawyer. My stomach turned. Ruth spoke first, her voice sharp. "So Eliza and Dylan are just the latest puppets?" Cynthia nodded slowly. "Looks that way. And if that's true, then your doctor and your investment manager might also be part of a larger circle feeding families into this scheme. A perfect formula. Target wealthy elders, frame them as incompetent, stage an accident, and funnel the assets." I pressed my hands against the table to steady myself. "You're telling me my daughter didn't just betray me for her own greed. She joined something already practiced." Cynthia's gaze was sympathetic but unyielding. "It doesn't lessen the betrayal, Mrs. Grant, but it does mean you're not alone. Others have fallen into the same pattern. The good news is your survival broke it. You are the first living witness we've had." Max leaned forward. "We've got files, recordings, forged documents, that USB drive." "Yes," Cynthia said, "but it's not enough. Courts will ask, were you coherent? Were you misremembering? We need indisputable evidence that ties Lang, Collins, and Reed directly to the scheme. Money trails, emails, meeting logs. And we need you, Mrs. Grant, willing to go public when the time comes." My mouth went dry. Go public. That meant more than surviving. It meant stepping back into the world, tearing off the cloak of death Eliza had wrapped me in. I looked down at the cold tea Ruth had poured, the steam long gone. My hands shook against the porcelain. "I'll do it," I said finally, my voice quiet but certain. "I won't let them bury me or anyone else in fire." Cynthia nodded once, sliding her recorder into her bag. "Then we start now. But you must understand, Lucinda, these people don't leave loose ends. You're not just fighting for justice. You're fighting for your life." Her warning lingered like smoke. I thought of Vermont. I thought of Idaho. I thought of the cabin still smoldering in Montana, its ashes carrying the story Eliza wanted told. But I was alive. And with Max, Ruth, and Cynthia, I was no longer fighting alone. Justice does not always begin with a courtroom. Sometimes it begins with a whisper that unsettles the guilty. Ruth and Max wanted to move carefully, collecting hard evidence. Cynthia urged patience, warning me that one wrong step might push Eliza and Dylan to cover their tracks more thoroughly. But I knew my daughter's mind. She had always been bold when she believed herself unchallenged. The only way to shake her was to remind her that shadows sometimes talk back. So I wrote her a letter. I used the same handwriting Eliza had once mocked for being too elegant, the script Benjamin used to call my signature melody. Every curve, every flourish, I carved into the page with deliberate care. The ink bled slightly thanks to Ruth's antique fountain pen, but that only gave it age, authenticity. The words were simple. "You forgot, Eliza, that I still remember the way home." I folded the letter into a scented sheet of stationery I had saved for years, pressed between books Benjamin once read aloud. The paper carried the faint trace of lavender. I dusted the edges with ash I had brushed from my own hair, embedding my fingerprints faintly in the smudge. When light touched it, the ridges were clear. It was not just a letter. It was proof that the fire had not consumed me. With it, I slipped a postcard I found in Ruth's desk, an old photograph of the Montana cabin before it was renovated. Across the blackened image, I wrote in steady hand, "Meet me where it all began." The envelope was sealed with wax. We mailed it from a small town 30 miles away, one that Eliza would never suspect I could reach. 3 days later, Max called me to Ruth's parlor. He had a grin like a fox who had scented panic. "It landed," he said, "and they took the bait." Through a friend at the post office, he had tracked the delivery. Eliza received the letter in the morning. By noon, she had called Dylan 6 times. By evening, the neighbors reported shouting from inside the house. Later that night, Max slid a small recorder across the table, a bug he had planted on the outside porch of their home. We leaned in, listening. Eliza's voice trembled, frantic, the way it used to when she was a little girl searching for her lost doll. "It's her handwriting. I know it. You don't understand, Dylan. She writes like this with the loops, the lavender paper. She knew how to find me." Dylan's reply was sharper, colder. "It's impossible. We saw the flames. We locked the door." "Then explain this." Paper rustled, the letter being waved between them. "Her words, Dylan. She's alive. She has to be." Silence followed, punctuated only by Dylan's measured breathing. When he spoke, his tone carried unease for the first time. "Or someone wants us to think she's alive. Either way, it means trouble. If she really did survive, then we didn't finish the job." I clenched my hands, the burns tightening under the bandages. Finish the job. My son-in-law spoke of me as though I were unfinished business. On the recording, Eliza's voice cracked. "What if she comes back? What if she tells—" "Shut up," Dylan snapped. "Panic is what will ruin us. If she's alive, we'll know soon enough. And if she isn't, then someone's playing us, and we'll find out who." The recording ended with the sound of glass shattering. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. For the first time, I felt the balance tilt. They were unsettled. They were afraid. Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've rattled her, Lucinda. She's spiraling." Max nodded. "Fear makes people sloppy. We'll see mistakes now." But Cynthia's warning returned to me. These people don't leave loose ends. If Eliza and Dylan grew desperate, they might move faster, become reckless. My gamble had worked, but it had also invited danger closer. That night, I sat by Ruth's window, watching the lights of Portland flicker in the distance. I imagined Eliza pacing her house, clutching my letter, hearing my voice in every creak of the floor. Did she think of me as a ghost, risen from the ashes? Or did she remember me as her mother, the one who once brushed her hair and told her that truth always mattered? Perhaps both. The letter was not just for her. It was for me. Each stroke of ink had been a declaration. I am not gone. You cannot erase me. My memory, my voice, my dignity, they still live, stronger than the fire that tried to consume them. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear Dylan's whisper at the cabin door. Hope you like fire. Now, I whispered back into the silence, hope you like ghosts. The next step would not be a letter, it would be action. Eliza and Dylan had planned my death like a business venture, cold and calculated. But now they would begin to question shadows, glances, every sound in the night. And that doubt, that fear, they were my first weapons. The living room had not changed much since Benjamin's time. The same mantel, the same framed photos in their polished silver borders. Only the arrangement had shifted, just enough to remind me it was no longer my house. Eliza and Dylan had claimed it as their own kingdom, but tonight I claimed it back. I sat in my old armchair, Benjamin's watch loose around my wrist, its gold face ticking softly. On my lap rested the family photo album, thick with years. My fingers brushed across its leather cover, worn smooth by decades of turning. The clock on the wall ticked past 9 when I heard the front door, keys jingling, laughter thin and brittle. The lock turned. They stepped inside, Dylan first, Eliza behind him. The sound of their voices dropped when they saw me sitting in the dim light. Dylan froze, his hand still clutching the keys. Eliza's face drained of color, her lips parting soundlessly. "Hello, darlings," I said softly, exactly as I had planned. "Welcome home." The silence that followed was colder than any flame. Dylan's mouth opened, then closed, like a man grasping for words underwater. Eliza staggered back a step, her hand reaching for the wall as though the house itself might steady her. I turned a page of the album, my voice even. "Do you remember this one?" I held up a picture. Eliza at 7 years old, her cheeks wet with tears. The scribbled note beneath read, "Eliza cried for hours after the rabbit died in the movie." I looked at her, my gaze sharp. "You were the kind of girl who couldn't bear to see an animal suffer. And now, you locked your mother in fire." Her breath caught, and she turned away. Dylan finally found his tongue. "This isn't possible," he muttered. "You were dead?" I supplied, closing the album with a snap. "I was meant to be, but you see, some fires only purify, they don't consume." Eliza's voice broke through, tight, defensive. "You can't prove anything." I smiled, cold and calm. "I have more than you think, more than you ever imagined." Her eyes flickered with panic. Dylan's jaw tightened. The distance between them widened as the weight of my words settled in. I leaned forward in the armchair, my hands clasped over Benjamin's watch. "Do you know what this house taught me? Memories live in objects. They carry whispers of the past. You move the frames, scrub the walls, redecorated. But the truth always lingers. It seeps into the air, into the cracks, and it waits." Eliza's eyes flashed with something I had not seen in years, fear mixed with rage. "Why are you here, Mother?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm here," I said, rising slowly, "because forgiveness is not what I came for. I came for the truth, and to remind you both that I'm not ashes. I'm flesh, blood, memory, and proof." Dylan's face hardened. You think you're clever, but this will end badly for you. Perhaps, I replied, my tone sharper now, but you forget. Your lies are brittle. I've seen them, I've heard them, and soon others will too. I opened the album again, flipping to the last page. A photo of Benjamin smiling, one arm around me, the other holding Eliza as a child. I traced the caption with my finger. Family is forever. My voice dropped. He believed that. I did too. But family is not forever when it sets fire to itself. Eliza shook her head, tears pricking her eyes, though she fought them back. You don't understand. You don't know what it was like. I don't? My words cut sharp. I gave up my youth for you, my comfort, my peace, and all I asked was love in return. Instead, you gave me fire. The silence pressed in again, thick and suffocating. Dylan shifted, restless, glancing toward the kitchen as though escape could be found there. But I stepped forward, the weight of Benjamin's watch steady on my wrist, the echo of his voice in my memory. Truth has a way of finding cracks. I met Eliza's eyes. You wanted to erase me, but you only erased the illusion that I could still be blind. I see you now, Eliza, and I see you too, Dylan. Dylan's fists clenched. You think the law will believe you? You think anyone will take your word over ours? I laughed softly, a sound that chilled even me. The law won't need to take only my word, because I have their words, your words, recorded, rehearsed, filed neatly in your home like trophies, lies you practiced for cameras, forged signatures, a death certificate waiting for ink, all copied, all safe. Eliza's face twisted. You went through our house. Yes, I said simply, and your secrets welcomed me like old friends. Ruth had once told me that confrontation was not about shouting, but about silence, knowing when to let words hang until they choke. I let mine settle now, watching the weight crush Eliza's shoulders. I closed the album one final time and placed it gently on the table. I didn't return for your forgiveness, I said, steady, unflinching. I returned to take back what was stolen, my life, my dignity, my name. And you should know, Eliza, Dylan, I never fight without proof. The ticking of Benjamin's watch filled the room. Dylan swallowed hard. Eliza's tears finally broke, streaking her face. Neither moved closer, neither spoke. They knew. And in that moment, the power shifted. The house felt smaller with the three of us locked inside, every breath a contest of will. I remained standing in front of the old coffee table, the family album resting there like a tombstone. But now, I placed something heavier on top, the folder Max and Cynthia had helped me prepare. I spread the document slowly, methodically. First, photographs. My cabin before and after the flames. One image alive with golden wood, Benjamin's handwriting etched into the beams. The other, a charred skeleton, its bones blackened. Eliza flinched as though the pictures burned her again. Dylan looked away. Next, I laid down 2 official reports. Vermont, I said, tapping the first page. A man worth $32 million. Cabin fire. Dementia narrative. The heirs walked free. Then the second. Idaho. Widow. $60 million. Same story. Same lawyer. The same language repeated word for word. Eliza's voice cracked. What does that have to do with us? I met her eyes cold and steady. Everything. Because your lawyer, Patricia Lang, signed both probates, and her name appears here. I slid forward the copy we'd taken from the basement, Eliza's signature right beside Patricia's. Dylan tried to mask his fear with anger. This proves nothing. Paper without context means nothing. I smiled faintly and reached for the final stack. Then perhaps Dylan's financial portfolio will give you context. I spread the pages like playing cards. Investments wired through accounts Marcus Reed controlled, properties transferred under shell corporations, all lined up neatly in dates that coincided with the forged signatures. The silence pressed in like smoke. Dylan's fists clenched at his sides. Eliza's breathing quickened, her gaze darting between the papers and my face. Then I leaned down and pressed a small black device onto the pile, a recorder. Its red light blinked. "I've been listening," I said softly. "Not just tonight, from the beginning." Eliza frowned, confused, until I lifted my gaze. "Do you remember Benjamin's paranoia? How he insisted on cameras in the cabin after that break-in 15 years ago? He never removed them. You thought you burned the truth with me." But the fire didn't touch the safe behind the stone wall. It still held his little devices. And every word you whispered before the match was struck, every smile, every nod was captured. Dylan's face drained of color. He took a step back, his bravado cracking. "You're lying." I clicked the recorder. The room filled with the hiss of playback, then Dylan's own voice, crisp, undeniable. "Hope you like fire." Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dylan lunged forward, but I snapped the device shut, my eyes never leaving his. "That is just a fragment. Cynthia Hale already has copies. So does Max. If anything happens to me again, those files will arrive on every news desk from here to Washington." The color left Dylan's face completely. Eliza sank into the couch, her shoulders trembling. For a moment, the only sound was the steady tick of Benjamin's watch on my wrist. I let the silence stretch, heavier than any scream. It was not rage that carried weight now. It was quiet certainty. Finally, Eliza tried to laugh. It was brittle, hollow. "What's your plan, Mother? To blow this up in the media? To humiliate your own daughter?" I stepped closer, my voice low, firm. "Not humiliate. Protect. This isn't just about me. It's about every mother, every widow, every elder who still believes their family would never betray them. If I stay silent, others will burn. Others will drown in forged signatures and false narratives. I don't intend to let that happen." Eliza's laughter broke into a sob. "You think anyone will believe you over us? We've already told the story. The press. They sympathize with us." I placed a hand over Benjamin's watch, feeling its pulse of time. "They will believe because truth leaves fingerprints. It smears across ash. It lingers in recordings. It seeps through lies. You built your empire on silence, Eliza, but silence can also be a weapon." Her eyes met mine then, and for a flicker, I saw the child she once was, the one who had cried over a rabbit in a film. But the woman before me was steel twisted by greed, and there was no undoing that. Dylan found his voice again, rough and bitter. "So what now? You think you've won? You think a few files and tapes will erase us?" I straightened, gathering the documents back into the folder with slow precision. "I don't need to erase you. You've done that yourselves. My task is only to show the world what you really are. The masks you wear, dutiful daughter, grieving son-in-law, they'll crumble the moment light touches them, and light is coming." The quiet deepened, pressing into their bones. I could see it in their eyes, the dawning terror that comes when lies collapse under their own weight. I looked at them one last time, my voice steady, final. "I'm not here to beg. I'm not here to forgive. I'm here to do what is right, for Benjamin, for myself, and for every soul you would have burned to keep your hands clean." No one moved. The room was thick with truth, and truth itself had become the loudest sound. The silence after my words was not empty. It pulsed, thick with everything unsaid. Dylan's hands trembled, though he tried to clench them into fists. Eliza sat pale and shaking, her mask cracked wide enough for me to see the fear beneath. And then Dylan snapped. "This is insane," he barked, his voice pitched high, desperate. "You think you can stop us? You think your little tapes and files matter? You don't even know how big this is. We're not the first, Lucinda. We're not the last. People want this. Families line up for it. They pay for it, and we deliver." His words, hot with arrogance, spilled into the open air before he realized what he had said. The front door burst open. Shadows moved fast. Boots, jackets, flashlights. Cynthia Hale entered first, her badge flashing under the lamplight. 2 federal agents flanked her, weapons drawn but steady. "Thank you, Mr. Warren," Cynthia said calmly, addressing Dylan. "That was the confession we needed." Dylan froze, his eyes darting from her to me. Eliza's gasp cut through the room like glass breaking. "You set us up," she whispered, her voice cracking, raw with betrayal. I remained still, Benjamin's watch ticking steady on my wrist. "No," I said softly. "You set yourselves up. I just let the silence catch your words." Cynthia motioned for the agents to secure the room. One gathered the files from the table, slipping them into an evidence bag. Another pressed Dylan against the wall, reading him his rights. Eliza didn't resist. She slumped into the couch, staring at the family album as if it might rewrite itself. Cynthia turned to me. "Lucinda, you should hear this. It's bigger than your family, much bigger." She opened a thick folder she carried and laid out photographs, charts, maps. My stomach tightened as I leaned closer. 8 states, Cynthia said. Vermont, Idaho, Montana, New Hampshire, Oregon, California, Colorado, Maine. In every one of them, we've found patterns. Elders declared incompetent through forged psychiatric evaluations. Fire, falls, sudden heart attacks. Always the same type of tragedy. Always the same beneficiaries walking away with millions. She tapped one photo, a smiling man in his early 60s, his hair slicked back, his eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. Dr. Adrian Vale, former neurologist. Expelled from the medical board 10 years ago for falsifying records, he reinvented himself as head of a private cognitive wellness clinic. Officially, he counsels families on how to support aging relatives. Unofficially, he supplies the paperwork that erases them. Another photo, a modest clinic building, the sign polished, Vale Institute for Advanced Cognitive Care. Families come to him desperate, Cynthia continued, afraid of dementia, afraid of decline. He offers a solution: diagnose the parent as unfit, transfer control of the estate, and if needed, arrange a dignified accident. He calls it accelerated transition. The bile rose in my throat. A dignified accident, I repeated, my voice shaking. That's what they told themselves when they locked me in the fire. Cynthia nodded grimly. Eliza and Dylan weren't masterminds. They were clients. Vale's network handled the details, supplied the doctors, smoothed the probate filings. They paid their fee and waited for the inheritance. Your survival is the first crack in a very profitable empire. Eliza finally found her voice, weak and trembling. We only did what they told us. They said it was safe. They said, "Enough," Cynthia cut her off. "You'll have your chance to speak in court." I looked at my daughter, and for a fleeting second, pity pierced me. She was not merely greedy. She had been seduced by a machine that preyed on weakness, on impatience, on entitlement dressed as love. But pity hardened again into resolve. "I thought it was just me," I whispered, my throat tight. "I thought betrayal lived in my house alone. But it's a generation erased so the next could feed on what they never earned." Cynthia's gaze met mine, steady, fierce. "Yes, and with your testimony, with your proof, we will expose every one of them." The agents moved Dylan toward the door. He struggled, shouting, his voice cracking. "You'll regret this, do you hear me? We weren't the only ones. Dozens of families, dozens trusted Vale. You can't undo all of it." His words echoed as they dragged him out, fading down the hall. Eliza stayed seated, silent now, staring at the floor. She didn't look at me, she didn't look at anyone. She just folded into herself, small, broken. Cynthia placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "We'll take it from here, but Lucinda, You should prepare. What you've set in motion will shake people. There will be trials, headlines, backlash. It won't be quiet." I nodded. My voice came steady, colder than I expected. It doesn't need to be quiet. It needs to be true. The room emptied, agents gathering evidence, voices low and professional. I remained by the table, my hand resting on the album. I opened it once more, staring at the photograph of Benjamin holding our young daughter. His eyes were kind, steady, alive. "I thought I had lost only you," I whispered to him, though only silence answered. "But it turns out I lost the world we built. They sold it for fire and lies." The watch ticked. The album pages rustled in the draft of the open door. But for the first time since the flames, I felt something rise inside me. Not just grief, not just rage, but clarity. This was no longer about my fortune, or even about Eliza. This was about a reckoning, waiting to sweep across every family that had thought they could turn their elders into currency, and I would not be silent anymore. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old wood, a place where echoes of lives destroyed and restored lived side by side. I sat near the back. Benjamin's wedding ring looped around a silver chain at my throat. My hands folded over the leather folder Ruth had pressed into my palms. Eliza and Dylan entered under guard. They looked smaller now, not the towering shadows who had locked me in a cabin of flames, but two figures swallowed by consequence. Eliza wore black, not out of mourning, but as if the color could shield her. Dylan's jaw was set tight, but his eyes darted with the nervousness of a man who finally realized his mask no longer fit. The charges rang out like a litany of betrayal, conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, fraud, federal crimes tied to elder exploitation and inheritance schemes. The words filled the chamber, heavy, undeniable. Each syllable was another match lit, but this time not against me, against them. When the judge called for testimony, I did not rise. Instead, I handed forward the folder. Inside lay the recordings, the photographs, the forged documents, the files from Cynthia and Max's investigation. My written statement sat atop the stack, signed in the same steady hand that had once signed birthday cards and school permission slips. The defense waited for me to speak, to unravel in front of the world, but I gave them only silence. My voice had already been recorded in every page, every piece of proof. The fire had once tried to erase me. Now the evidence burned brighter than any words I could summon. The prosecutor read a line from my statement aloud. "Flames cannot burn memory, but truth can light even the darkest ash." For a moment, the room stilled. I could feel Benjamin's watch against my wrist, ticking like a reminder. I had survived because memory itself had survived. No gas, no match, no forged paper could undo that. I watched Eliza as those words landed. She did not weep, not once. Her face remained set, stone over hollow. She had always been my daughter, the child who once sobbed for a rabbit on a movie screen. But now, she was something else entirely. Someone who had chosen silence of the wrong kind. Silence that kills. Silence that erases. Dylan shifted beside her, his body restless as the recordings played. His own voice echoed across the chamber. "Hope you like fire," and he winced like the sound was a knife. The courtroom attendees murmured, the words cutting into them as they had into me. The trial moved like a tide, inevitable, unstoppable. Witnesses from the FBI spoke. Cynthia delivered the larger map, the network of inheritance erasures across 8 states. Other names rose, other families implicated. It was not just my betrayal, but a web spun wide and dark. And in its center, Eliza and Dylan, 2 eager clients willing to trade blood for fortune. When the jury filed out, the silence returned, heavy as stone. I sat unmoving, Benjamin's ring cool against my skin, Ruth steady at my side. Hours later, the verdict came back. Guilty. On every charge. The judge's gavel struck, final and echoing. It sounded less like wood on wood and more like closure cracking open. Dylan's head dropped into his hands, his shoulders sagging. Eliza only stood, her chin lifted, her face pale and unreadable. Not a single tear touched her cheek. As they were led out, the slow motion of their steps felt unreal. Shackles clinked softly, boots pressed against marble. Eliza turned once, not toward me, but toward the exit, as if she still believed freedom might wait just beyond the door. But freedom had never been hers to keep. She had chosen fire, and fire had answered. I remained seated, my breath steady. I had not spoken aloud in that room, but my silence had spoken louder than any plea. Proof had carried my voice. Truth had been my witness. And I thought, as the doors closed behind them, the flames had not destroyed me. They had only burned away the illusions. 3 months later, the air around the cabin smelled different. No longer smoke, no longer charred pine or ash. Lavender sprouted in neat rows along the rebuilt porch, their purple buds swaying in the breeze. The cabin had risen again, not as my prison, but as a sanctuary. We called it Haven House, an anonymous center for older women who had been betrayed by those who should have loved them most. I walked slowly across the gravel path, my hand brushing against the weathered wicker chair we had placed outside. It was not Benjamin's leather armchair, but something simpler, humbler. When I sat in it, the woven pattern pressed into my palms, grounding me in the present. Cynthia was already inside, her jacket folded neatly on the chair beside her. Ruth sat opposite her, glasses perched on her nose, a thick file open in front of them both. The cover read, Legacy Reclamation Project. "This is the first batch," Ruth said, sliding the folder toward me. 5 cases, 5 elders whose assets were stripped under forged incompetency reports. Their families declared them unfit, then sold their lives for profit. I touched the folder lightly as if it were fragile. In truth, it was iron, evidence that would bring dignity back to women and men who had been silenced. Cynthia leaned forward. "Lucinda, what you started has already rippled wider than you realize. Since the trial, victims have begun writing in. Some are still alive, some through advocates. They're asking for help. We can't undo every betrayal, but we can return what was stolen, at least some of it." I opened the file. Names, dates, photographs. An 82-year-old woman in Oregon declared incompetent 2 months before her son purchased a yacht with her savings. A retired teacher in Vermont whose forged signature had transferred her farmland to a nephew she barely knew. The ink was neat, the stamps official, but the truth screamed from every page. My throat tightened. "These aren't just numbers," I whispered. "They're lives." Ruth nodded. "And your testimony opened the door. Courts are beginning to reconsider cases that looked too neat. With Cynthia's team and my contacts in probate law, we can file motions to reclaim estates, quietly, carefully, piece by piece." I looked up, the lavender-scented air drifting in through the window. For the first time in years, the room didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like rebuilding. On the wooden table lay a small tin box, one I had carried with me since Benjamin's death. Inside were scraps that had survived the fire, a singed photograph, the corner of his handwriting from an old letter, his wedding band that I wore around my neck. Memory was not erased. It had only changed shape. I closed the file gently and whispered, more to myself than anyone else, "The fire didn't end me. It lit the path." Just then, Ruth handed me a small package. Brown paper, string tied in a knot too tight for frail hands, my name written in shaky script, for Mrs. Grant. "No return address," Ruth said. "It arrived this morning." I untied it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper, thicker than most, the kind children use in art class. On it, drawn with colored pencils, was a simple picture. A small house with smoke rising from a chimney, not fire. A woman with white hair stood at the door, smiling, holding hands with another figure, a younger woman. Above them, a single line written in uneven strokes. Thank you. Because of you, I lived twice. My breath caught. Tears blurred the drawing until the lines melted. Cynthia's voice softened. One of the women rescued after Vale's network collapsed. She was found alive in a nursing home, barely hanging on. When she heard your story, she asked someone to send this. I held the drawing against my chest, the paper crinkling under my fingers. My body remembered the heat of flames, the taste of smoke in my lungs, the betrayal in my daughter's eyes. But in that moment, I also felt something else, the pulse of survival beating not only in me, but in strangers who had nearly been erased. I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for reminding me why I survived." Cynthia closed the file, her eyes steady on mine. "Lucinda, this is no longer just about justice. It's about legacy. You're showing a generation that silence can protect, but it can also destroy. And you chose the right kind." I nodded, slipping the drawing back into the tin box beside Benjamin's ring. It did not belong to me alone. It belonged to every woman who would walk through Haven House's doors. Outside, the lavender bent in the wind, releasing their fragrance into the air. I imagined the women who would sit here one day, breathing it in, finally free of the weight of silence. The past had left its scars on me, but the future waited, open, fragile, and worth protecting. And as I rose from the wicker chair, I felt the truth settle in my bones. Flames may burn wood and walls, but they cannot burn memory. Justice, once spoken, will never stay silent again. I never believed victory would feel like this. Not fireworks, not applause, not a grand speech. Just quiet. A chair on the porch, a cup of hot tea warming my hands, the knitted shawl Ruth had left on the armrest. My body still remembers the fire, the rush of smoke, the sting of ash, but my soul has learned something greater. I did not defeat Dylan or Eliza. I did not crush their ambition or erase their names. What I defeated was the silence that once smothered me. The silence of being forgotten, dismissed, locked away like a relic in my own family. I did not win against them. I won against oblivion. Sometimes healing comes in the smallest gestures. Anna, Tuesdays I sit with Ruth in the kitchen. We bake bread, letting the smell of yeast fill the air. Children from the neighborhood wander in, carrying sheets of paper and pencils, eager to draw. I teach them how to shade the wings of a bird, how to color lavender so it looks alive. Their laughter rises like music in the house that once held only echoes of betrayal. There is no courtroom drama here, no chains clinking, just crayons, flour on our sleeves, and the simple rhythm of life being rebuilt one quiet hour at a time. And in those moments, I understand something my younger self never could. Healing is not about erasing the scars. It is about living gently with them. At night, when the air grows cool, I write letters. Not to Eliza, not to Dylan. Those doors are closed. Instead, I write to women I've never met. Widows, mothers, grandmothers, who send their own stories through Haven House. Some tell me of sons who drained their accounts, daughters who left them alone in nursing homes, nephews who saw them only as a signature on a deed. I cannot answer every letter, but I try, and sometimes I hear my own words spoken back to me, like a voice carried through the wind. If you have ever been pushed outside your own family, you are not alone. If you have survived fire, not only with your body, but with your faith, you are justice itself. I remember the first time I spoke those words. It was not in court, but in my journal, written with trembling hands. They have since found their way into brochures, into speeches Ruth gives at small town halls, into the quiet hearts of women who thought no one else had endured what they had. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, carried in the stories we pass to each other when no one else is listening. I sit now on the porch as the sun slips down, its amber light softening the silver in my hair. The lavender glows in the last of the day, and the wicker chair creaks under me like an old friend. My breath leaves me steady, not ragged. For the first time in years, safety feels tangible, not fragile. Inside the rebuilt cabin, a new lock turns easily. It does not imprison, it protects. I hear the faint click as Ruth closes it for the evening. That sound, once a symbol of betrayal, has become my motif of peace. Locked doors, but not against me. Locked doors keeping me safe, keeping what we have built secure. I do not live waiting for the next betrayal anymore. I live teaching a child how to hold a paintbrush. I live tasting bread, warm from the oven. I live remembering Benjamin not with fire, but with lavender, with laughter, with the small tin box of memories that survived. No, I did not burn. I was reborn. Before we say goodbye, I want to leave you with this. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee in your hand, or a late night where stories like this keep you company in the dark? Tell us in the comments. We read each one with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, I ask you to stay with us. Subscribe, not just to hear more stories, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, in a city buzzing with noise, in a small town where the nights are long, or in a kitchen where the scent of bread lingers, I hope you carry this story with you. Remember, sometimes miracles do not knock loudly at your door. Sometimes they wait quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and I will see you in the next story.